Hi, welcome to Community Empowerment. I'm Roberta Martin. Today with me in the studio is the President of Growth and Justice, Dane Smith. Gentlemen, you're welcome.
Roberta,
Yes.
pleased to be here.
It's a pleasure having you tonight.
Yes.
I would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, my name is Dane Smith. I'm the President of Growth and Justice. I have had a long career here in Minnesota as a journalist, covering politics and public policy, covering political campaigns, as well as the big debate over the big issues that are so important to all Minnesotans. At the state capitol in Washington, at city halls, local governments, I've kind of covered every level of government for all those years. And about 8 years ago, I had an opportunity to leave journalism and get more involved directly in public policy. And Growth and Justice is a really, obviously I think it's a wonderful organization. We do research and public policy that solve problems for Minnesota.
Okay.
And as we see it, the biggest problem year in and year out for our state and for the people who live here is growing inequality. Economic inequality between the 1% and the middle class, which is struggling, the middle income groups, the lower income folks in poverty. So this inequality between groups of people at the top and the bottom is a big, big problem facing the whole world, really. The Pope talks about this problem. It's happening in every country. And global capitalism is not working too well right now for all the people in the world. So we're very concerned about this. Equally, we are concerned about racial inequality. There are kind of two different aspects to the problem, but the racial inequality has been with us for a long time, and it's not getting better fast enough. And we think it's a really long-term problem of very serious proportions for Minnesota. You know, we're not going to do well. Minnesota's always been a prosperous place. We've had a good economy for many years, but it's because there's a level of equality in Minnesota. We're famous for that. But with our new racial division, our new racial diversity, we're seeing that kids of color are too far behind on readiness for kindergarten, for educational attainment, and so they're not able to integrate and contribute to our workforce the way that they ought to be able to. We need to invest in their success and their human potential, and by doing so, we will ensure that Minnesota is competitive, that our businesses have the best workers, and that our people have enough money to buy the goods and services that business produces.
Right.
And so the inequality problem drives growth and justice, and our name is a marker of respect for the private sector. We know that business needs to survive, business needs to do well. We have respect for markets and business and profits, but we also know that government's important and that public investment in education and transportation, healthcare,
Right.
environment, these are important things the government does with our taxes.
Absolutely.
That's good. So the left and the right, too often, the left is too abusive and dismissive of business. The right is, and the right is often too, the right is often too disrespectful of government and taxes.
Right.
And so we try to bring it together in a constructive way to come forward with policies at the state level, at the state capitol mostly, that help reduce inequality, invest in human capital, build a better, stronger, more equal Minnesota.
Wonderful. You know, I'm a very big reader of your articles, and I've read so many of your articles. And so I thought that, you know, I bring you here and then ask some few questions based on the things you've written down.
Yeah.
And so if you don't mind, we
Sure.
just go into some of the questions I wrote down.
Yeah.
The first question is, in the last Growth and Justice Progress Report, You wrote that the legislative product of the last 2 years produced perhaps the most momentous shift in 40 years towards reducing economic, racial, and social inequalities while investing anew in human potential of all Minnesotans. Now, could you describe for your viewers the bills passed in the 2013 and 14 biennium that contributed to the most to reducing inequalities?
Sure, I'd love to. My
Thank you.
favorite subject.
Thank you.
First a little historical context.
Okay.
Almost 40 years ago, back in the early 70s, we realized that we had something of an inequality problem in taxation and the resources that school districts had. Some regions were poor, some were wealthy. And so our schools had vastly different amounts of money they could spend to educate kids.
Okay.
And it made the inequality worse because the poorer districts had less money to help to educate their children. So we passed something called the Minnesota Miracle.
Okay.
And we also, in Minnesota's history, were one of the first states to pass an income tax,
Okay.
which leveled resources so that people who were behind could catch up, a great principle, progressive taxation. In other words, if you had more, you paid a larger percentage.
Yeah.
And so Minnesota has this strong tradition, and it's not just Democrats, it's Republicans who imposed these policies,
Okay.
brought these progressive policies to Minnesota over many decades, all through the last century. And so, but what started happening in the like 1980 was began to see global capitalism spread in ways, and technology began to develop in ways that began to widen the inequality again.
Right.
And then we had a bunch of, frankly, conservative policies that help protect and enhance the wealth and income of those at the top. Those CEOs, business shareholders and stockholders, and general policy favored them over the last 40 years. So this has been a long time coming,
Right.
and it's resulted in these inequalities.
And so the policy really did not help the middle class. Is
Exactly. Policy was running the wrong way in this state and this nation.
that okay?
So as a result, really, of the 2010 election and then 2012, we had a consensus of more progressive policymakers in the House and the Senate and the governor's office,
Okay.
with some considerable business support and nonprofit organizations, foundations
Okay.
that actually draw their fortunes from wealthy people in the past,
Right.
who decided it was time for an equity agenda in Minnesota. And we really did a lot in 2012, or 2013 and 2014. And I'll just quickly describe.
Sure.
You asked what were the bills that were passed.
Right.
You remember the tax bill.
Right.
We increased taxes again on wealthy people.
Back in
Actually, 2013.
13.
We raised taxes on the wealthy. Actually, what we we were restoring a previous high tax. We had cut the taxes.
Okay.
So we went
We
back
went
to
a
the
little
other
bit.
rate.
Okay.
So that was huge. That raised $500 million a year
Affecting.
from the most wealthy people
Right.
to pay for schools and roads and health care and hospitals and all the good things that
Right.
good government does, good
Right.
democratic government. So that was important. That stopped the inequality, or helped stop it.
Okay.
The other big piece, you remember the big debate on the minimum wage.
Minimum wage. Yes.
That had been sitting there at a very low level for a long time. And so we increased that substantially, and that puts about $500 million into the hands of those at the very bottom, and some in the middle. So if you raise taxes on the top and you raise the wages on the bottom,
Right.
that's
It
gonna,
doesn't
that's
really-
going to help with inequality.
Right. Right.
It's bound to help.
It doesn't balance.
It doesn't begin to make up for all these years of increasing inequality, but it's a huge start.
Right.
But then there were a bunch of other little things, each of them contributing to what I call an equity consensus. You had new investment in scholarships for early childhood education.
Okay.
So parents actually got more money for kids who are maybe not ready for kindergarten, for them to go to not just babysitter,
Right.
but a high quality place where they can learn their ABCs and
Right.
and really be ready for kindergarten. We also passed a Women's Economic Security Act, a whole bunch of provisions that help women who are also suffer from inequality.
Right.
Women only get what, about 70%?
70%.
About 70% of what men get
Right.
in the workforce. We had a DREAM Act that removed obstacles to higher education for undocumented immigrants. Now, most African immigrants are documented,
Right.
but the Latinos, from folks from Mexico, many of them are not documented. They didn't have permission to come for
Right.
whatever, but their kids are here.
Their kids are
Kids
here.
are growing up here.
Right.
They're speaking English. They're part of our community,
Right.
and our laws prevented them from going to college.
And some of them working our farms and
Exactly.
right.
They're doing work. They're
Right.
working hard,
helping the economy,
helping the economy, working at cheap
labor.
wages.
Right.
But we needed to help them realize their human potential. So we did that.
Right.
That was the DREAM Act that removed those obstacles for those Latino kids. We did a dramatic expansion of health care benefits. Remember MNsure,
Yes.
the health care,
That brought the health care.
right, the marketplace for health care. So now we went from about 90% of Minnesotans having health care to 95%. That's tens of thousands more people with health care.
Right.
We now have one of the lowest uninsured
Right.
rates in the country.
In the country.
That helps inequality.
That helps. Right.
I mean, when you start adding these things up, you realize the last 2 years were just amazing. We did a bunch of things with world's best workforce education funding bill that not only increases investments in the schools, K-12, but helps all the way from birth to career readiness.
Right.
People really trained to do the jobs of the new economy.
Right.
And then we did some other things. In non-budgetary laws, we removed some of these sanctions that we have against people who have been in prison,
Right.
where there's no forgiveness, there's no
Right.
ability for them to ever get that removed from their record.
Right.
This
So
is
they
bad.
can be able to find jobs and
Right.
be able to get an apartment
Get
and
credit.
different. Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
so
And then move on with
move on.
life,
Right.
yeah.
Move on with their life. And so that happened. We need to do more in all of these areas. But we did a number of things that will reduce racial disparities in unemployment. We did anti-bullying legislation.
in the schools.
In the schools, right. This bullying legislation is a form of inequality. It's kids
Right.
of power
Right.
and who are often picking on kids who are perhaps gay. Kids of color often get bullied.
Right.
And then at long last, we have marriage equality now for same-sex couples,
Right.
which is certainly gets at the equality problem. So this is a pretty astonishing set of things we did.
Right.
We have a long ways to go.
So these are some very wonderful things. But, you know, as I listen to you, I'm thinking about the change that is going on in, you know, in the House.
Right.
And so that brings to mind my next question, which is, so all this was done when Democrat had all the three legs,
Right.
the legislative stool, the governor, and then the House, and then the Senate. But realistically, right now, in this 2015, with a divided government, with a GOP House and a Democratic Senate, what do you think we can do? How can we move from where
Keep moving.
we are right now
Right.
to, you know, improving on what we have done? Are we going to slack down, or do you think that because there's a divided House, we probably will not be able to find common ground to be able to achieve something better or
That-
increase? Yeah.
That's an outstanding question, Roberta.
Thank you
And
so much.
everybody's concerned about this. And I'm pretty optimistic that
Okay.
that the pace of change will not be as rapid with a more conservative majority in the House of Representatives. No doubt about it. But already, you know, I've been observing politics and the language that people use in this state for 40 years. This new majority in the House is not nearly as harshly dismissive of inequality as conservatives used to be.
Okay.
They recognize this, and they are the ones in their campaigns. Some of them, I think, won because, especially out there in greater Minnesota, where there's some inequality because people have lower incomes,
right,
and the jobs don't pay as much, and there aren't as many jobs. They were the ones who raised the question. These new conservative Republicans were saying, we've got a problem with the middle class. They're not getting a bigger share of the profits. Their wages are flat. So they themselves are drawing attention to it. So that's helpful. They've also sent signals that they do not intend to repeal the minimum wage.
Okay.
They might temper with it a little bit. They've sent signals that they're not going to try and pass huge tax cuts for the wealthy, although there might be some efforts to change it a little. But they've sent some signals that they want to be more reasonable.
Okay.
In these classic battles that we've had between the two parties over whether equality is a problem or whether we can do anything about it. And so I'm pretty optimistic about the new Republican majority being sincere about wanting to do something about inequality. They have often different remedies and different policies than those that Growth and Justice favors, but at least they recognize that we have a problem. Mm-hmm. So that's good.
So let me just say, on a personal note, would you say that you are hopeful?
Yes.
You think we can be able to do something positive?
I'm very hopeful, and I can see that they're already talking about tax cuts for low income and middle income people. Tax credits for child care.
Right.
And some, they like to cut taxes in government, but if they reduce the taxes on people at the bottom, and people in the bottom do pay a lot of taxes.
Right.
Sales taxes, property taxes. If they can do it, if they can apply their tax cut mentality there, that makes some sense.
That makes some sense.
That's in the whole inequality thing.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I'm very optimistic.
I think I am too. I think I'm very optimistic too.
I think people are finally getting this, that we're not going to do well unless Paul Wellstone, the former U.S. Senator here, used to say, we all do better when we all do better.
When we all do better. Because then when we all do better, crime wave will go down.
Right.
Employment issues will rise.
Right.
People will start doing better.
If you have a large number of people who are poor,
right,
and desperate, and angry,
right,
and cynical,
right,
and dysfunctional,
right,
nothing works well.
Nothing works well. The complaints and the crime.
Right.
Well, we've been talking about equality for a while. I want us to start talking about some racial issues here.
Racial issues.
Racial issues. And I know those topics are very sensitive to some people, but we got to talk about them.
Absolutely.
We got to talk about them. So that brought to mind the next question. On many measures of racial disparities, Minnesota scores near the top. What steps can Minnesota take to ensure progress towards greater equity in education and income for people of color?
This is the big question we're all trying to answer. What are the steps that get us there faster towards racial equity?
Right.
And really, I'd like to say this about the two kinds of inequality. There's the inequality between top and bottom without respect to race. You're not paying attention to race, just 1%ers. I mean, there's a few African Americans there. Oprah Winfrey and
Oprah Winfrey's
some
there.
Of these athletes,
entertainers,
and entertainers are up there,
right?
And some business leaders too. That's at least that's better. There used to be an absolute ceiling.
Right.
If you were a person of color in this country 50 years ago, the likelihood you could succeed, there was a hard ceiling.
You can't even
you
vote.
Couldn't break through. Couldn't even vote.
You can't even vote.
Right. And you were excluded from professional schools.
Right.
Couldn't be a lawyer. Couldn't be a doctor. I mean, it was just outrageous.
Right.
So we've punched some holes in that ceiling that kept people down. But so that's good. But in general, the overall inequality that's affecting our global capitalistic system that results in the 1% getting everything has reinforced this age-old, centuries-old racial disparity that is part of American history.
Right.
And Minnesota sort of escaped it because we were all white and we did not really have to deal with racial disparities.
Right.
When I came here in 1971, we were, I think, about 98% white. Only 2% of our entire population were of color. Now we're pushing 20%. That's 10 times the percentage in just 40
Right.
years.
So do you?
And we're headed for, in the next 40,
Right.
White people will be minority sometime around the middle of the next century.
Right. So
in
you
this state.
perceive that it's going to be even more. It's going to increase.
Right. Looking back, we see this tremendous increase in our racial diversity.
Right.
And looking forward, all the experts are projecting that it will just continue and accelerate.
Okay.
Which is great. You know, one of the things I like to point out in a real practical way about what's great about diversity is that the whole world is diverse,
Right.
and the more Minnesota is diverse, the more we're going to thrive
Equality,
in a world
Absolutely.
where folks are really conversant and broad-minded and,
Right.
and
Different cultures.
different cultures working together harmoniously in our own state is going to be necessary for us to compete in the world economy.
Absolutely.
People who can speak different languages, people who understand the way the world works in other places, that's going to be really helpful for us.
Interesting. Yeah.
The very selfish thing for me is the food is so much better here. The food was not great in Minnesota, the restaurant scene,
Right.
before
Back
we
in
had
the
African
19
immigrants and Asian immigrants.
Right.
And Southeast Asian in particular, Mexican and Latino influence, Caribbean. I mean, it's great now.
It is great.
You
So
have
now
some-
you can just, you don't have to go to Kentucky Fried. I mean,
That's
Kentucky
right.
Fried alone, or
Right.
maybe
It's pretty much, it was in the old
Diversity.
days, it was you know, steak and corn on the cob, and
right.
that's about it.
But now you can go to some Vietnamese restaurant and just taste a different kind of food.
Right, right. So the diversity is going to work for us eventually.
Right.
But these disparities that you asked about are huge. They're really a problem. And part of it is because our white population has always outperformed the white population in other states. So that makes them higher.
Right.
And our new communities of color often have been brand new from other countries, so they're poorer than the diverse populations that already are in other states. But a big part of it, too, is institutional racism.
Right. That's right.
It's maybe unintentional. A lot of white Minnesotans don't think they're racist,
Right.
but they don't have any friends
Right.
of color. They don't, if they own a small business, they never think to hire a person of color.
Right.
Study after study shows that there is subtle discrimination from grade school on
Right.
by white people who do not understand or respect other cultures. We see from kindergarten on, discipline policies in schools that are clearly unfair to communities of color.
Right.
And we need to re-educate ourselves on the history of racism,
Right.
face it in our own lives, and this is beginning to happen. A lot of foundations are pushing education programs called things like Facing Race or
Right.
Race Matters.
Right.
And I think Minnesotans are very gradually, things happen slowly, beginning to face the facts
Right.
of racial disparities,
Right.
the role that discrimination plays in that,
Right.
and begin to think about ways that we can equalize these disparities, because we just can't
Keep on. Right.
we can't thrive, we can't prosper as a people half slave and half free.
Right.
That's the way Lincoln put it back
Right.
when we did have slavery.
Right.
But we've got to all move forward together.
So you had mentioned about institutional racism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any changes coming into maybe, let's say, organizations and businesses and companies and
I sure do.
corporations?
I sure do. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
We used to set goals for racial hiring, and they've been in place for a while. We didn't put enough teeth in the laws, enough
Right.
real penalties for failing to reach them. But just in the last few years, various racial justice groups, us and others, many others, have been getting the state government for projects that are financed with our taxpayer dollars
Right.
to set much higher goals for racial hiring.
Okay.
And an example is the new stadium that's going up in downtown
Oh,
Minneapolis. A huge project,
Right.
$1 billion, thousands of jobs there.
Right.
And we set a goal of around 33%, 32%, I think was the goal. You had to hire, the contractors who were building that stadium had to hire at least 32% people of color. Well, that's close to the percentage that are in the Minneapolis area.
Right.
It actually might even be a little lower.
Okay.
But it was a very much higher goal than previous. I'll be darned if we're not getting close to it. When we set a low goal, we don't achieve. You know,
Right.
if you fall short of a low goal, you're way
Right.
behind falling short of a higher goal.
Right.
And you know, the numbers are still coming in on the stadium, but we're beginning to see some
Improvement.
some really very good improvement. The subcontractor for the stadium, Thor Construction, is minority owned. It's entirely, all its employees are communities of color. And if you go by that stadium and you look at that workforce, you can see that it's not all white hard hat guys the way it used to be in this state. So that's just one example of how we're breaking through and
Right.
we're making a difference.
We're making a difference.
It's my understanding, I just heard this the other day, that you know, we have a separate police force for the transit system, the trains and the
Right.
buses.
Yes.
It's called Metro
Transit.
Transit
Right.
Police, basically. The director of that organization is getting close to 20 to 30% communities, people of color,
Right.
on that police force. And this is going to be a big issue for us. We need to have many more people of color in our teaching in our public schools. We know that kids do
Right.
better if their teacher looks like they do,
Right.
or at least there's somebody in the school that looks like they do.
I agree. And the mental health institutions,
Mental health institutions,
counseling,
absolutely.
psychology
Right.
institutions,
The
the juvenile systems.
juvenile system, social service workers.
Right.
You know, in Hennepin County, they've done some interesting things, wonderful things. They've decided that the requirements for human service workers was a little unrealistic, and too much college was required. So they've done some things to get communities of color into the human service systems, the systems that dispense,
Right.
you know,
Different.
food stamps and the TANF program and so
Right.
forth.
Right.
And so they're hiring dozens more people of color into Hennepin County. They found out that they don't need to make these really strenuous requirements on their education. They can teach them specifically how to do their job. And they're on a track to get that higher education on the job, to get more education so they can do better
Right.
work and be more skilled. So we can see, I'm seeing this happen, this model being developed all over the
Right.
state.
All over the
People are
state.
finding ways to equalize the employment hiring
Industries.
and the wages too.
Right.
In greater Minnesota, the population is mostly Latino and Mexican.
Right.
And the communities there are also working very hard to make sure the kids are doing better in school and have access to higher education. We talked about the DREAM Act before that
Right,
clears
right.
away the obstacles for
Right.
kids to go to college and to
Right.
get scholarships and to get student aid to go to college.
Right.
So, you know, it's going to take a while,
So
no
that-
question, but we're making progress.
Right. So that's very promising.
It is.
Yeah. You talked about education, so that brings me to the next question, because it tied to that. It says, Knowing the disparities in educational attainment for communities of color, what concrete proposals are currently in 2015 legislative session to expand access to education and training for disadvantaged population? And who are the champions we should be supporting in these efforts?
I think one of the most important things we have to do is start as early as possible
Okay.
with early childhood education, high quality early childhood education. And there's a coalition of groups called Mini-Minds,
Mini-Minds.
M-I-N-N-E, capital M-I-N-N-E, capital M-I-N-D-S. Mini as in Minnesota, Minds.
Oh, okay.
And this group is comprised of big corporations, big business, early childhood experts and educators themselves, people who provide daycare and early childhood care.
Right.
The foundations, educational institutions. And we need about at least $150 million a year more into this program, which gives parents the money to put their child into the highest possible quality program.
Right.
One where they really have a good rating. They're actually rated in the quality of their early childhood instruction.
Okay.
So it's more than just
curriculum.
More than just babysitting.
Okay. So then we're going to really have some.
So if we invest a lot more in that kind of program,
right,
that'll do good. But the Governor Dayton,
right,
has also proposed making early childhood education, this is before kindergarten, like 4-year-olds,
okay,
making this available to everybody in the state.
Okay. So then it's not going to be also a daycare. It's going to be.
Right. It's like preschool.
Okay. Okay.
Pre-kindergarten.
Pre-kindergarten to prepare
them. So it's for 4-year-olds.
Right.
And this would be available in every school, or at least the schools that want to do it.
Right.
And you know, this might not be the best approach because it might not be targeted enough to kids of color.
Right.
And the lower income kids, the way the Mini-Minds program is,
right,
which puts the money in the parents' hands so they can put their kid wherever they want,
right,
as long as it's high quality.
Right.
So those are two really important things that are already proposed for early years. Now at the other end, as kids come out of high school,
right,
there is a proposal that makes community college, which is, you know, a 2-year college,
right,
or technical school. Well, I think it's just community college.
Right.
Absolutely free.
Right.
To qualifying persons.
And actually, that's my next question too.
Yeah. Okay.
So what is the possibility of getting President Obama's plan to move the free education level from 12th to 14th grade, otherwise known as the 2-year degree for community college?
I think the possibility of getting something like this in Minnesota and nationally is pretty good.
Okay.
But I don't think it's going to happen right away. It was fairly expensive, for one thing. It cost hundreds of millions nationally, and probably tens of millions at least. Well, it probably cost billions nationally, and it would cost hundreds of millions, 10 to 100 and some million to do it in Minnesota. So it costs quite a bit of money. But I do think we're starting to move in this direction.
Okay.
You know, in America for a long time,
right,
it is understood that you are entitled to 12 years of education, 12th grade.
12th grade.
You're entitled to that much.
Right.
It's pretty much free.
Okay.
You have to, you know, usually pay for clothes and some
food,
school supplies, but it's mostly free.
Right.
And we decided a long time ago that was good for our country.
Okay.
Giving kids a free education until they're 18 years old, to either prepare them to go to work right away or to go to college, that was the way to go. And it actually worked very well for us.
For many years.
It's a big reason why America is so rich.
Oh.
Because we were alone more than 150 years ago in providing free education.
Right, in the world, maybe.
In the world.
Okay.
We were way out front.
Right.
And then we started providing it to women.
Oh.
girls even.
Okay.
Before that was done.
Right.
But we provided it to every single person. And not only did we say it was free, we said you had to go.
You had to go.
You had to go. There was no choice.
Right.
You had to go, and the government was going to pay for it.
Educating people.
Educating people we
Right.
decided might be a good idea for our society,
Right.
for our economy,
Right.
and we were right.
Right.
We had the highest education attainment level of all the nations in the world,
Right.
way before they caught up with us.
Right. For a
And
long
now they're
time.
catching up with us, and they're passing us up.
They are passing us out?
10 nations have a higher education attainment average than we do. Most of them are in Europe,
Oh.
Northern Europe, Canada, Japan. Most of these nations now have a higher average educational attainment, 13 or 14 on average years.
Right.
That means some college.
Right.
Than we do. And we're hurting because of it. Our economy is not doing as well because we are not the most educated nation in the world. At least that's our theory. We think it's the most important single thing that we did
Right.
to make this a wealthy country.
Right.
So it's clear that 12 years is not enough to have a good job. To really be trained in the economy of the future, you need
Not now.
You need a credential.
Right.
You need to know how to do some computer stuff.
Right.
No
Technology.
matter what you do.
Technology is advancing. Science is.
Science,
Yeah.
even if in the old days you could be a mechanic, work on a car
Right.
with less than a high school education. Not anymore. The
Not anymore.
electronics and the complexity of automobiles and all this technology demands more education.
Right.
So there's a revolution going on out there about how we do that.
Right.
Revolution, all kinds of creative thinking about how we do that and whether we're doing it the right way. But it's pretty clear that we do need more education to be entitled. Now, the president is saying 2 years of community college free. I think it may not be exactly the right way to do it, but we need to move in that direction to make
Some
13 or
progress.
14 years an entitlement in this country.
Right. So
But
do you think it's going to happen?
I think we're going to move that way, and I think Minnesota, right after the president, at the same time he announced it,
Right.
the state senators and then our state senate proposed the same thing.
Right. So Minnesota is in line.
Minnesota's right there
Right.
in terms of beginning to think about an entitlement
Right.
to free education extending beyond 12 years. So I think it might take a few years till we figure out how to do that, but we moved in the wrong direction starting 30, 40 years ago when we began to make tuition
Reimbursement.
tuition too high,
Oh, yeah.
and tuition began to go up.
Loans. School.
Loans. Oh, the loans are terrible.
I have a lot of them.
You know this. This is a national crisis, the way
Right.
that people have been required to take money out to get
Absolutely.
their education
Yes.
and borrow against that, against their future earnings. I've heard it compared to indentured servitude. Way back in our history, not only did we have slavery, but there were other people who were, in return for learning a trade,
Right.
were bound to their
Oh.
master or employer
Right.
for a certain number of years. And the student loan program is beginning to feel a little bit like that.
Absolutely. I agree.
So yeah, I think we've got we're finally beginning to understand the big important principle that education is investing in it and making sure everybody gets it is good for all of us.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. The NEDI recently launched its own training school called the Prime Academy to teach industry-specific skills in the case software development.
Software development, right?
Right. Isn't this a better model to find when compared to simple extending public education by another 2 years?
I took a look at the Prime Academy and the nerdery and what it's doing. It's brand new.
Right.
It looks interesting. It looks like I and many other folks say, let's try everything. Let's think outside the box. That's the
Right.
phrase you often hear.
Okay.
Do something fresh and creative. This sounds like an interesting idea. They actually claim that they can, in 18 weeks, can have somebody ready to do computer programming.
Right.
I think it's a little too early to tell
Right.
whether this is the answer or even a significant answer. I've seen so many fads come and go in
Right.
education. People for a while there were just certain that the thing that would turn education around would be if all the kids wore school uniforms so they didn't feel unequal.
Right.
It turned out not to really be the answer. And then people come along with another fad. They'll say, boy, if every kid has a laptop, you know,
Right.
that'll be the answer.
Right.
Just give them a laptop. The early results, early tests, or early studies of kids having a laptop
Right.
are not that great.
Not that
It's
great.
not the, it turns out there is no magic answer. There's no single thing.
Right.
It has to be a whole
Different.
variety of things, focused on the whole child, on the social environment, their health, their nutrition, you know, and how much income their family has.
Right. So the wholeness of
The
person.
wholeness is the way to is the only way to think about it.
Right.
And it's complicated when you think about the whole thing.
Right.
And there's so many parts to it, but we don't really have any choice. I mean, the world's a complex place. We can handle it.
Right. We have about 18 minutes left, and I would like to take just a couple questions, and then
Sure.
we'll wrap up. We hear that Minnesota will have an increasing shortage of workers in the coming decades. What do you think will be the cause of the shortage?
Well, it's really bound up in this incredible post-World War II baby boom.
Okay.
I was part of that.
Okay.
3 or 4 million American men went off to war away from their women
Right.
for 3 or 4 years.
And they were gone.
They were gone.
Right.
And then they came back.
Okay.
And guess what happened? Babies.
So that's where the name came from, baby boomers.
The baby boom.
Oh,
That's-
so then
that's-
they just had so many
All of a
babies.
sudden, it's the largest bubble in
Okay.
the American population in our
Right.
history.
Okay.
When usually you have so many people born every
And
year,
it's
and it's
setting-
pretty steady.
Right.
People die, people are born.
Right.
Then you had this boom that went like this, the baby bubble or baby boom. And I was part of that. There were so many babies being born. You know, most of these returning GIs had 4 or 5 children, or 2 to 5. You know, it varied. There were only 2 in my family, but it was so crowded in my elementary school in first grade that we had to go in shifts. The class had one class in it from 6 in the morning
6 in the morning.
until noon, and then another class came in, the same classroom, and went from noon to 6. So the school was twice as many students as it normally had from double shifting.
Right.
So anyway, that's the baby boom.
Right.
And you know, it's impacted every part of American life over the years. All of a sudden, everybody was a teenager. And so you had the Beatles and
Right.
popular music and the 60s and experimenting with drugs and the crazy things youth
Right.
did. And then they moved into their 30s and their 40s and they got to be more conservative.
Okay.
And then we had, you know, it was interesting. The political climate changed a little
Right.
bit from crazy liberal youth to a little more conservative tax-paying people.
Right.
And so this baby boom has been a big thing and a big influence on every aspect of American life over the last, since they were all born in the 50s.
50s.
And now the boom is getting old, and they're quitting work. They're retiring.
They're retiring. And that's a large group
A
of.
large group of people
Right.
are retiring, so they're leaving jobs. Many are leaving jobs that require a great deal of experience and skill, which these boomers have developed in these jobs.
Over the years.
Management and technology jobs are filled by these boomers who are smart. They know how to do the job, and they've
Been
learned it
doing
over many years. And it's
over
hard. It's kind of hard to show somebody how to do something when you've been doing it for 35
Many
years. And,
right.
And so what we have is what we're going to have pretty soon is this labor shortage, humongous, big
How so?
labor shortage. Well, all these boomers are retiring, so their jobs are open.
Right.
And
vacancy.
already we're seeing many businesses not able to fill these jobs. They can't find the people with the skills
Right.
and the education and the training to do
Right.
these jobs,
Right.
in manufacturing especially, and in some of the technology fields. So this is the happy circumstance we have, is we have all these kids of color who need jobs,
Right.
are behind in their education, need to catch up, haven't had the opportunity. So what we do is we put a lot of resources and investment in these kids, this new diverse population that we have,
Right.
so that they can fill these jobs that are being left by the baby boomers. That's the big demographic opportunity
Right.
and problem that
Okay.
we face. It's often called the graying and the browning of Minnesota. So what we do is we take the browning, replace the graying, everything's okay.
Everything is okay.
So it really is, it is wonderful that we have growth in our population.
Right.
It is among communities of color,
Right.
but they need investment in their realizing
Life.
everything they can be and their
Right.
human potential, so that we can
Feel
continue
those-
to have a good, strong economy in Minnesota.
Right.
That's always, brain power has always been our, we're kind of cold, we're out of the way, it's not a place that people want to come to visit too much, in the winter especially. We do have tremendous natural resources. We have water, wonderful abundance of water and lakes, and we have
10,000
beautiful-
lakes,
we have
right?
10,000 lakes. We have 15,000 actually. So we're a
Oh.
beautiful place. We have forests. We have rich fields.
Right.
We have some of the richest soil in the world. So
Right.
we have a rich set of natural resources.
Right.
But the real secret for Minnesota has always been this fully developed human potential. We really were ahead of other states in taxing, raising taxes fairly, and investing it in education, in good physical infrastructure systems, water, sewer, roads, highways, schools, hospitals, the physical stuff that makes a society
Right. Rich.
healthy and wealthy and wise.
Right.
And we just have to stick with that formula. But we have to understand, I think white people have to understand that their preconceived notions about the abilities of communities of color to be full, equal partners has to change.
Has to change.
That has to change.
Right.
And it's hard to get people to change old ways,
Right.
old attitudes, but we can do it.
We can do it.
Yeah.
We have about 12 minutes left, and we'll take just
Yeah.
a couple more. We are told that a college degree leads to a higher earning. At least that's what I have believed for a long time.
Yes,
Okay.
it is actually true.
It is true. Huh? Okay, yet many college graduates today work at low wage in positions that do not require a college degree. Why is this happening? Is this a temporary situation that will change as the worker shortage develop, or one that is expected to be permanent? What can we do to get college graduates to track to benefiting from this education?
Yeah, this is another one of the biggest, most important questions
Right.
facing us. It's called, the single word for it is alignment.
Alignment.
In other words, we all know people who have maybe an advanced degree, maybe in history
Right,
or English
right,
or the humanities,
Right.
art degree,
right,
who they have a lot of learning in their head about liberal arts and their chosen field, but they can't get a job in that field. So they end up working in a job that doesn't require that much education.
right,
Maybe, the joke is there's a lot of PhDs who are
Right.
driving taxis.
That would
But
be
you know
very
what?
sad.
That it's going to be, he'll get higher tips because he'll be a better conversationalist than
Right.
somebody without it. Actually, there are studies that show that no matter what field you're in, whether you're a bartender or a taxi driver, if you
Right.
have a higher education, you'll make more money
Right,
because you'll rise in the ranks, you'll be a supervisor, and you'll have, you just have more skill and knowledge, and it just sort of makes common sense. Despite this fact that a lot of people have degrees for which there are no jobs, it is still true that is a direct correlation between the level of education you have and how much money you make eventually.
Okay.
So this is often a short-term situation where you can't find the job in your field, but you will find, we know that employers are still looking for people who are educated broadly,
Right.
who have a wide
Variety.
horizon, and these liberal arts degrees actually are the ones that wealthy parents are still investing in for their kids. They're still,
Right.
if you're really wealthy, you're pulling every string you can to make sure your kid gets into a liberal arts college,
Right.
and a prestigious one,
Right.
like Stanford or Harvard, of course. That's the
Right.
ultimate. But if not, some other four-year degree,
Right.
so that you're broadly educated. That
Right.
really is valuable. And the statistics show, despite all the anecdotes about the PhDs and taxis, that there is a really sharp line like this that goes up with income and education. If you have a high school degree, your bar is this high,
Right.
about 30,000.
Right.
If you have a 2-year degree, it goes up
A little bit
40.
more. Right.
If you have a 4-year degree, it jumps up to about 60 or 70. If you have a advanced degree, it goes over 100,000.
Right.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
Right.
It
And is
really
it true?
does make a difference.
So it is true, right?
It is true. It
So-
is true. But there is enough evidence that because of the latest recession in
Right.
particular, when nobody could find jobs and too many people got laid off, that a lot of people with higher education and degrees couldn't get the job for which they were trained. I think that's temporary. And we just talked about the demographic shift, the fact that so many people are leaving the workforce because they're retiring,
Right.
the boomers,
Right.
that will take care of itself, and that we will need to continue improving post-secondary completion, not just going to college, but getting the degree. So that's a primary focus for Growth and Justice for Minnesota, is that post-secondary completion, but especially for kids of color, because they can't compete unless they have the paper.
Right. Right.
The degrees
Absolutely.
and diplomas and credentials.
Right.
They have, actually the studies show that because of discrimination, ongoing racial discrimination, subtle as it might be, that among kids of young people of color who have a degree and white people who have the same degree, the same education,
Right.
the white person's more likely to be hired at a higher income.
Right.
That's not fair.
It's not fair.
It's not fair. So we need to, but it's certainly the kids of color, youth of color, can't begin to compete unless they at least have that degree
Right. To compete.
So that's the thing to remember.
Right.
That,
So it's not just a degree too. It's also skills. Is that
right.
what
It's
you,
got to be the
you
right
said
degree.
something.
Right.
Right.
Right. It's not just a 4-year or 2-year degree.
Right.
When we say post-secondary completion,
Right.
we mean it could be a credential to be a nurse's aide, to
Right.
be a carpenter, a plumber. Actually, that's pretty demanding work. Or to be just to have a credential to work in a barber shop or to cut
Right.
hair. So something. You got to have some
Something.
extra,
Some sort of.
something beyond high school.
Right.
That's the goal.
Okay, I have some more questions, but our time is up.
Oh,
and
darn.
Yeah, we're done. So what I want you to do right now is, can you give our viewers, including myself, some kind of hope, concerning the economy with the
Yeah.
changes? You already talked about the changes
Right.
that is in the House right now, with majority Republicans and a
Right.
few Democrats.
Right.
Can you tell us something?
Yeah.
You think it's hopeful, you said earlier. So
Here's something that's really hopeful.
Okay.
I think both parties and both ideologies, liberals and conservatives,
Right.
Republicans and Democrats, are in more agreement about the inequality problem than they've ever been.
okay.
There's still some pretty far out people on the right in particular who deny racial inequality or who say it's not important.
Right.
There's a few, but
Okay.
increasingly they're not saying that.
Okay.
People are not contemptuous or dismissive of people on the bottom the way Mitt Romney kind of was when he ran for president. But he said
Right.
that half of people pay no taxes, or half of people are just, not contributing, or they don't matter, or they're all you know, that they're basically parasites and
Right.
and the people on top are making everything happen. That kind of language is gradually disappearing
Okay.
from politics and policies. So that's good. Thoughtful conservatives care about this. That's important. There is kind of a coming together. And here's some good news, really
Okay.
good news.
Okay.
The latest statistics on high school graduation in Minnesota show that kids of color are rising faster than white kids.
Okay.
But white kids are doing better too. But the rate of increase for high school graduation, for at least getting through high school, for kids of color is up now to 62%.
That's great.
62% of kids of color are now graduating from high school.
Right.
It used to be down around 50.
Right.
So that's a 12 percentage point increase over the last few years. And the good news is, remember what we said about when we all do better, we all do better?
Right.
Evidence shows that when kids of color do better, the white kids do better too,
Absolutely.
because it's just a healthier
Environment.
situation, healthier environment. And so the graduation rate for white kids, statistics just out in Minnesota, is up 4 or 5 percentage points. So the gap is closing because kids of color are catching up. There's white kids are just going up a little bit, but they were already pretty high on most measures, and we're starting to see kids of color do better. So that, you know, the bad news is we got a long ways to go.
Right.
The very good news is we are making progress.
We're making progress.
It's not hopeless.
Right.
All the things we're trying to do are having a cumulative effect.
Right.
And so we have every reason to be confident that we'll reach the promised land that Martin Luther King described of racial equality and harmony.
Right.
And that you know, that the dream he had can be achieved. It's being achieved in smaller ways and measures. And the important thing is to persevere and persist and not give up and not despair, not get cynical
Right.
about our ability to do this. And we will overcome.
Dane Smith, President of Growth and Justice, it's been great having you.
Great talking to you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching Community Empowerment. We'll see you again next Tuesday. Thank you.